Hello and welcome to another tutorial. So this time around we are going to be making teleporters, but a very specific type of teleporter. So if you're familiar with Stargate, there's actually multiple types you can see in that, but in that, one of the ones, you get a whole bunch of rings appear, and so there's the two platforms, these rings appear, and essentially what's on each platform swaps. So that's the kind of teleporter I want to be able to set up with this one, where we can also pick the destination. Definitely this is not influenced by the fact that I've been rewatching all of Stargate. But if it's a cool type of teleporter to make. There's other ones I want to make at a later point as well. If there's particular things like that you've seen in a game or in a movie, TV series, things like that, that you'd be interested in seeing, and a version of that, feel free to chuck in a comment below. Always keen on other suggestions of different areas, things like that I can build, and things like this are a lot of fun to build. So, diving on in, let's take a look at what we've already got to start off with. So, this project, it's fairly similar to the template I've used in a lot of ones. It has my custom first-person controller in it. I also have set up these ring teleporters. So they're already set up with a prefab. We've got these guard rings that will appear. And then that's pretty much it. So they don't have too much on them at the moment. So we're going to get a few things set up. So one of the first things that we want to get set up is there's an animation that needs to happen with these. And so what that animation is when something steps into and activates the platform, these rings appear up through the floor. So we want to have that happening. And that's going to serve kind of two purposes. One, just looks cool, but it also serves the purpose of it creates a little bit of a guardian area. So it means once you've activated it, you can't then just sort of immediately duck out. It keeps you safely locked in there, and then the arrival platform, it also sort of secures that a bit as well. So I want to get that animation set up first. So starting point for that is going to be, I'm going to create an Animator Controller. So have my Anim controller, ring teleporter, which I'll just bring that onto this one. Then I can set up my individual animations for it. So the first one I'm going to do is for the rings appearing, so them rising. So we'll call this Anim rings rising. So the idea behind this is I want each of these rings to appear up, and I want them, so the first one that starts moving will go to the highest point, and then the next, and then the next, and then the next. So we want to get those set up. So what I'm going to do, just as a starting point, is if I start this recording, and then I just do a quick modification of the position, that'll chuck in keys for all of these, and then I can start to edit the particular ones. So what I want is, in terms of positioning of all of these, I want the highest up one to start moving first and to arrive first. So we're going to have that one, let's say it arrives by 30 seconds. So we've got 7 rings, so we're going to position that one, I think, at 2.1. Looks good. I'll just make sure that's properly recorded that, which it has. So that one's going to appear at 2.1 by 30 seconds. Then we'll say at 35, we want this one to be at 1.8. Then at 40, we want ring 5 to be at 1.5. So just get each of these configured. 1.2, ring 3, 0.9, ring 2, So 0.6, and then we have the final one at 0.3. So then we can just test and see how this looks performance-wise, whether it has the right sort of feel. And that's okay, but I think it's a little too fast. So if I drop that to like a 30, so effectively doubling the number of samples. That looks okay. The other thing there potentially is could have a little bit of a delay before some of these other rings start moving. So that's the other thing that I could do there, of just making it that we have another key there where they don't start moving, so we have a little bit more of a delay there with them. Is a potential option there. So we could go through and just again at the 5-second marks, just putting in. I was just going to slow these down a bit so that there is a bit more of a spacing between them, because that's really kind of what we're going for with this, is just having that visual looking a little bit nicer. And then this one, so that looks better. So we can test them with that. And that looks better. That's more what I'm happy with. So that looks good. I'm quite happy with how that looks in terms of the appearance there. That is one where we don't want it to be looping. So, okay, that's good. That's the rising animation. We're going to need a couple of idles in here as well. So if we create a new clip, Anim, rings, idle, hidden, then these are quite easy. It's just an animation where we have all of those at 0. So the idle hidden one is quite straightforward. We can create another one for Anim, rings, idle, visible. And that is going to be largely the same sort of thing. So we just need to populate in all of these positions. So the setup with this, if you've seen the videos that I've done of making doors, this is largely a similar thing. We have our we'll have our 4 sets of animations, and each one of those then will get linked up in the state machine, and we'll use triggers for switching between them. So our looping ones just have it visible like of this. And then the final thing we need to do is, and I will actually copy these, because I then need to create the Anim, rings, lowering. And these need to start at this point, so they need to be starting at the point where we've got all of these positioned like this. So place, so it's properly updated. So a similar thing, these now need to collapse, but the difference is the order that this needs to happen in is different. Before, we moved the top ring first, and the reason we were doing that was we don't want the rings to be passing through each other. So a similar approach here. What needs to happen now is these ones actually collapse in the reverse order. That way we avoid any intersections happening with these, which is going to be making the animation look a lot cleaner and nicer. Now the thing we do need to watch for is, some of these are moving at very different speeds. So again, we will likely need to have that offsetting of where they actually start, just to make it so that they don't clip into each other. So what we'll end up doing, setting that up for each of these, just so that they don't start moving before they should. Oops, that one is 0.6. So it just gives them all a little bit of leeway so that everything appears correctly. So this one will be 1.2. This one will be 1.5. And then we have our 1.8 and 2.1. So that looks good. So we can again test that. And they collapse quite nicely. And I actually kind of want to keep the collapse one a little bit faster. I'm okay with the entry one being quite slow, but I think the lowering one, I want it to actually be quite fast. And again, turn off looping. And in terms of then in the animator, well, hidden is actually the default state. Then it can make a transition to rising. And then from rising, it will auto transition to visible. And then similar setup like this. So then we can add in our triggers, raise and lower. So to go from hidden, we add in the condition of raise because we want it to just immediately switch. We get rid of our exit time in any transition. We do the same thing for lowering, removing the exit time. So that's good. We've got those set up. That now is something we want to make sure that applies, like the prefab gets that. So we'll get that linked over onto everything. And we can have that turned on. So overrides. And we'll just do apply. I'm not doing an apply all because I do have Pro Builder built stuff. And I have run into weird issues in the past where that has actually caused problems and managing to corrupt stuff a little bit. So I want to just avoid that. So I need to set up a couple of scripts. So I'm going to have a ring teleporter. And I'm also going to have something that acts as a controller for it. So a teleporter controller. The reason for having this controller is when a teleport happens, there's actually a bit of a communication process and a synchronization actually that has to happen there, where the sending teleporter has to raise the rings. The receiving teleporter, we want then, after a little bit of a delay, those rings to raise. Once both are fully raised, we transport, then we lower both sets of rings. So we want to have a bit of coordination happening there. So that's where having just a teleporter controller, it's going to make that a little bit easier. It's also going to make it a bit easier from a point of view of we want to be able to know what destinations we've got available, stuff like that. So it's just going to make all of that just that little bit easier for working with. So we'll attach our ring teleporter script. So a couple of things we want to set up for this. We want to set up being able to tell it to raise and lower the rings. We also want it to be able to know when the rings have actually been raised and lowered. So public void on raise rings. And what that will do is this is going to have animator linked Anim controller. So we'll be able to do linked Anim controller set trigger, and we set the raise trigger. What I will also do is reset the lower trigger. So that will be for raising them. I also want to have one for lower, which will do the complete opposite. And I want to also then know on rings raised. So I want to be able to have an event that gets run when these actually are successfully raised and lowered. So on rings lowered, just so I can coordinate from a timing point of view. Also going to need here unique ID, string, display name, because we're going to have some form of directory, a way of actually selecting our teleport destination. So this allows us to have a unique ID and also then a corresponding destination, which will be really handy. So I can link up the animator in the prefab. Then in each of these, I'm just going to give them the unique ID and display name will be the same for the moment, but that will be something that could easily be different at a later point. The other thing I will need to do is I need to set up an event here in my animations. So in the rings rising one, I want to, and I'm going to do this essentially one frame before the end. The reason I tend to do that is I have found in the past that trying to kick off an event on the last frame doesn't reliably activate. So I usually will bring that event one frame beforehand. So this is going to run on rings raised. And then I can do a similar thing for lowering. And again, I bring it back one single frame. And I will link that up to on rings lowered. So that's good. We've got those animations configured. We have our teleporters have their names. They have the other bits set up for it. So that's looking good. I want to get the communications that are happening between the teleporters, and in particular, I want to get the ability for the teleporters to actually sort of talk to each other via this teleporter controller. So what I'm going to do with the teleporter controller is I'm going to make it a singleton, so it's easy for things to find. So we'll have a public static teleporter controller instance like that. And then in awake, what I would normally do is we do that, but first we check if instance is not equal to null. If it's not, then my general approach with this, because the only way this can happen is if we have multiple instances of our teleporter controller script on something, which is not valid. So I always will destroy this one and log error. Found a duplicate teleporter controller on gameObject.name. So we just provide enough info that in theory we should be able to track it down. So that's good, we've got that. I want to have a list of teleporters. So ring teleporter, teleporters, and again, that's a decent setup for it. I want that to always be a valid thing, because what I'm going to do then is I'm going to have public void register teleporter. And then known teleporters, or all teleporters, I think I call it. Or just teleporters. Cool. So teleporters, add it. Public void deregister teleporter, which we don't have a need for at the moment. But if we did, gives us a way of being able to do that. So that's good. Because what can then happen is in ring teleporter, when we start, we can say, okay, well, teleporter controller, instance, register this. Can also set up a void on destroy, and I want to check that it exists first, because it might not. It could have already, because the destruction order, we don't necessarily know exactly what that will be. So we want to actually check that it's not null. So that's good. So we can register, deregister. Great. That's getting us well set up for being able to have communications there. The other thing we could then start doing is we need to get the ability to select a teleporter happening. So what I'm going to do for that is, I just want to make sure these are all linked up, which they are. If I go to the prefab for my teleporter, then I am going to create here a UI canvas, destination panel. This is going to be set to be a world space UI. So my general approach with world space UI, set the width and height to reasonable values, as in reasonable numbers of pixels, and then use scale to manage the sizing of that. So we're going to set up a actual panel, which I'm going to tint that. So I'll probably drop that size maybe 200 by 200 pixels. So that's good. Generally with the UI, you'll probably find it needs to be rotated. And I just want to test putting in a bit of text. That'll let me know that I've got it facing the right way, which I do. So what I'm going to have is we'll position this at 1.25, feels about right. And this at 1.5, so just off to the side there. So what I'm going to have is teleporter name. So this one I'll anchor up the top, and we'll just position it like that. -5, a little bit of spacing on each side. Center that. Font size can drop, so this will be teleporter A. So it's going to be the name panel. And then we'll have another panel below that. It is going to be destinations. So this, I can actually change it to be like that. Name panel. I will shrink the size of this a bit. So it's like 50, probably even smaller than that. That looks good. Excellent. So then the destinations panel, that is going to start at 45. And this is going to just have all of the possible destinations. So how I'll organize that is I'm going to add in a button. So it'll just be a Text Mesh Pro button. And what I'm going to do is onto this add a grid layout group. And we can shrink the size of these a bunch. Probably that'll look pretty good, I think. So we can just test how that looks spacing wise. Pretty happy with that. That looks quite reasonable. We can align those so it's in the middle center like that. A little bit of padding on the sides, which will mean we have to slightly reduce that, which is fine. Set those spacings a bit. That would give us enough space without scrolling for 8 destinations, which I'm pretty happy with that. That would work. So that looks good. So that's our destination button. So we're going to set up a little bit of script logic for that as well. So UI destination button. So the destination button is going to need to know a couple of things. It is going to need to be able to update that text. So I'm going to bring in Text Mesh Pro, have my Text Mesh Pro UGUI, destination label. I need to keep track of the destination unique ID. Unique ID. I need the linked teleporter that this is connected to. So that looks pretty good. So that's the destination, and I'll actually rename that so it's properly destination teleporter just to make it even clearer. So that means I'm going to need a function for populating that stuff. So I usually refer to these as bind functions. So we'll make that have a ring teleporter destination. And then what I want to be able to do is, that obviously gets linked up in that way, but I want to be able to access stuff like the display name and unique ID. So what I'm going to do, because I don't want to make those public, is I'll set these up as like of this, a unique ID that I then link to that. Do the same with display name, because then in here, what I end up doing is our destination label. That won't be the destination unique ID, but it will be the destination teleporter display name. And actually, I won't need that. So that's good. We've got that set up. Our ring teleporter is going to need to be able to set these. So it's going to need, it will also need Text Mesh Pro. So using Text Mesh Pro, because it needs to be able to set its name. So Text Mesh Pro UGUI. Name display. We need to know where we're actually spawning this list of destinations in. So what we'll have is a transform destination UI route. And we then need the game object for what to instantiate. So destination button prefab and destination button route. So we can get these configured for this. This button also needs to pass through to this that it's been clicked. So on pressed. So that's going to need to, that's with the destination teleporter. Owning teleporter, because we need to also know which one we're actually talking to. So we're going to have ring teleporter owner, because then we want to be able to say, okay, well, owning teleporter, set destination teleporter. So it's just going to allow us to dial in a particular destination. So that means with our ring teleporter, we're going to set up here a public void, set destination. Then we can do current destination. So there's a lot of little bits that we need to sort of hook up for this, but once we've got them there, then it's going to make it really easy for working with this stuff. So, okay, we have the pressed option, that's good. So what we can then set up is, before we turn this into a prefab, we attach our script here. We can then link this up so it knows what function to actually run. And we can link it up to its particular bit of text, so it'll be able to update that. So this allows us to then turn this into a prefab. So destination button. Make sure it's named correctly to begin with. So that's now a prefab, so we can delete that. We can then also, with this, link up our name display. We can link up our destination's route and the button there. So then on start for a teleporter, well, it can populate its name display dot text is equal to display name. So it gets that populated. We're going to refresh destination list, and I am intentionally calling this refresh, and what you'll see is I will actually make this public. So public void refresh destination list, and I'm actually going to not call that there for a very specific reason we'll see in a little bit. So refresh the destination list. Well, let's get the population in first. So add in the destination buttons. So for each var teleporter in teleporter controller instance teleporters, if that teleporter is equal to us, we skip it. We don't need to add in the details for ourselves. Otherwise, well, first thing we need to do is we need to spawn that prefab. So var destination button game object. We instantiate, and with our destination button prefab, it's going to destination button root. We get the logic by taking that game object, get component, and we retrieve our UI destination button. Then we tell it to bind. So that bind function we set up, we say bind. We are the owning teleporter, and then we give it the destination. So add in the destination button. So that's good. And what I will do in the register and deregister ones here is for each var teleporter in teleporters, teleporter dot refresh known teleporter. We'll do it that way, just so it doesn't collide. So this way, when we add and remove ones, we're refreshing the list. So the teleporters will dynamically refresh their set of ones. So if we spawned in one later, it would just populate in there. But I need to now remove all of the ones that are already there potentially. So what I would normally do for this is index is equal to our destination button root dot child count -1, and so we're counting down. Then I would grab the child game object, destination button root dot get child at that index dot game object, and then I destroy that. So remove existing destinations. That should just mean that it's properly got those cleared out. So let's test this. Now we need to set back up our IDs and everything, which is okay. We'll get those configured. So let's test this out. What we want to be able to see, ideally, is that the names for these gets correctly configured, and we do have buttons on them. So we can see A has C and B, teleporter C has A and B, so those look correct. What I'm going to also do is I'm going to turn this teleporter off, because then its code won't run. So with that, we can see we have one destination, and then if I turn this one on, they update. So we've got it properly refreshing there, which is great. So we're pretty close then to being able to have actual teleporting happening. We've got the animation set up, we've got the ability to dial in a destination. We just need that part now for saying, hey, perform the teleport. So we need a way of being able to know to activate. So what I'm going to do is in the prefab, I'm going to add in a sphere collider that will be a trigger. And what I'm going to do is increase the radius of that a little bit and bring that up in height a little bit. Look at that. So the idea is going to be, I might shrink that a little bit further. Once you step into that sort of center area, that will be the criteria for it activating. So that looks good. So what I then can do is in the ring teleporter, have void on trigger, enter. That's good. Now I don't want this to necessarily be able to trigger from anything. So what I will say, serialize field, string, we'll go list string in case there are multiple tags we wanted to use, supported tags. So first thing we're going to do is check if supported tags contains that tag. If it does, we also want to check that we've got a destination. So if current destination is not equal to null, and that's the case, then we're going to say, okay, well, teleporter controller instance, perform teleport from us to the current destination. So that will be the one that controls whether or not we're actually, like where we're actually going with that. So we'll go public void, perform teleport, sender, receiver. So that's great. So first thing we will be needing to, so this is something that's going to happen over a particular bit of time. So what I will do is, and we're setting this up much more for sort of single player. If this was something where we're dealing with multiplayer, we'd need to potentially handle the fact that there could be contention there on the teleporters. We're not needing to deal with that at this stage because we're just focusing on getting that basic functionality. But what we might need to do is some level of sort of queuing there, where if something is in use, we don't allow it to be used again until that's finished. So, okay, that's good. We need to then sequence this. So, okay, what we're going to be doing first is we'll tell it that a teleport is in progress, and this will sort of keep track of the stage of it. So first thing we're going to do is we want to say sender, and if we take a look at what we've got sort of function wise, we do already have these as public. So on raise rings. The other thing we want to do is we kind of want to have the functionality for both of these lock. So I want to kind of do sender lock, receiver lock. And what this will do is we'll have a public bool is locked, which it won't be locked by default, but then I'll set up some little functions here, public void lock. Because what these will do is if well, this will require is locked to be false. The reason being, we don't want it to be the case we arrive at the destination and then immediately it's a case like, cool, teleport again. So what will happen is we'll arrive and we'll be able to, it'll ignore it until we exit the teleporter and re-enter it, which is what we want. So we lock. So lock sender and receiver. Raise the rings. Now I want to know when those rings are actually finished being raised. So I want to have void on, doesn't need to be public actually, on sender rings raised, and a void on receiver rings raised. So that's looking good. What we would then be able to do is we want to pass in a bit of logic for what happens. We could also pass this in as just a direct function. So what I want to be able to keep track of here is have a system.action rings raised action and a system.action rings lowered action. The idea being that when we do this, we can have a system.action on complete, which doesn't need to be provided, but can be. And that'll actually go here. Is what we then have is rings raised action, is that. Rings lowered action, is that. F, we have a rings raised action, then we'll invoke it. And very similar setup here, so it gives us a way of having things be notified. So rings lowered action. So it's good. So we can send through notifications there for this. So when we raise the rings on this one, we also want to, shortly after we start raising those, we want to actually start raising the rings on the receiver. So for now, we'll just do it at the exact same point in time. We'll have on sender rings raised. Then we'll have, and actually we could do it. This is what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to make it that once the sender rings have raised, the receivers ones will raise. And then when the receivers ones have raised, then we actually perform the swapping. So we do the actual movement at that point. So it's setting this up as a little bit more intricate, because I can actually do this. I can use a function, and that will then do receiver on raise rings. So we're making use of anonymous functions. Makes a bit handy to for setting that up. So it'll raise the rings. Once that's done, it'll raise them on the receiver. Then at that point, when that has completed, we would do the actual teleporting. So on the sender, raise rings on the receiver. So then what would happen is perform the teleport. After that teleport is done, which that would be an instantaneous thing. So we'd instantaneously do the teleporter. Then, well, sender on lower rings. Now that one, we're not going to wait for anything except it. So what it will do is then afterwards, it will just do a unlock. So sender unlock. lower the rings on the sender and complete the teleport. So that happens completely sort of independently. We don't need to be waiting sort of for that to happen. What we can also be doing is we want to lower the rings on the receiver. So lower the rings on the receiver. So that will be a similar thing on lower rings, receiver.unlock. That looks pretty good. Now the perform teleport's going to need to gather the objects in the area and then relocate them. That's straightforward enough to be doing. I just want to test and make sure that this sequence works. What I want to be able to do is I want to be able to walk up to one of these, set a destination, and then have the rings appear and disappear. So if I link this up, so I haven't set a destination on this, so I should expect nothing to happen, which is good. So with this, I need a bit of feedback there to indicate that I've set a destination, because it's a little hard to actually tell. So that's something where what I'm going to do is set up so we've got just a really basic, we'll have to set this up as a separate canvas, give us a really basic HUD with no raycaster on it, and give this a reticle. Should just make 5 by 5, should be right. Again, with raycasting off and a bit of transparency, just makes it easier to know what we're actually clicking on. And what we will also do is when a destination gets set, we want to then update the buttons and everything there so that we're correctly sort of showing which one is active at this point in time. Okay, so to set this up so we've got some feedback on knowing whether a destination is selected, we are going to make it that we also in here have access to, we can do it using unityengine.ui. We can have access then to our image, so destination button image. We'll have a color for selected color. If we just make that green, and a color default color. Because then when we actually press one, then I want to be able to say, okay, well, our button, so the destination button image color is equal to selected color. And then we'll also have a public void on deselect. And that will just reset things back to the default color. So then our ring teleporter does need to keep track of all of those bits of UI. So it's going to need those destination buttons. So just have that list of ones. So that's going to be something where when we do this, we clear them, we add in destination logic, and then when a destination gets selected, what we're going to do is for each button in destination buttons, be able to say button on deselect. We also need to be able to check because we only should deselect if the destination doesn't match. So I might change this to set selected destination, ring teleporter, teleporter. And what we then check is if teleporter is equal to destination teleporter, then we use selected color, otherwise the default. That makes it a little bit easier because this loop then just can go through and do that. So that's going to make it easy for us to know if things are selected. So we can wire that up in the prefab. So the destination button links to that image. It's got its selected colors there. I'll make that a bit of a paler color. I think will look better. The ring teleporter itself, the other thing we need to do is in supported tags, make sure player is in there. So with that, what we're expecting to be able to see is the majority of the stuff happening. The ring's coming up, the ring's going down. So, okay, now I have not selected a destination. So if I run into this, nothing happens. If I set A as my destination, or I could set B, and run in, the rings appear. I can just see the rings over on B that I selected. If I select A, the rings appear, and I can see them appearing over on the other one. So now we just need to do the actual teleporting. So I need to gather the objects in each one. So list, actually we'll do it like this, var sender objects is equal to sender gather objects, and receiver objects is equal to receiver dot gather objects. And then I'm going to do the actual swapping of those. So we need our gather objects function. So this is going to return, this will be public, it'll be a list of game objects that it returns, gather objects. So there's a bunch of different ways we could actually do this. We do already have our collider here that is sort of keeping track of stuff. So what we could actually do is have a list of game object. Tracked objects is a new list, like of that. Then we split our check here a little bit. So this changes. So if it meets those criteria, then we do that. But what we always do is tracked objects add other game object. And then we have a private void on trigger exit. Similar logic, except rather than doing an add, we do a remove. This just means it's stuff we're already doing a lot of the work for it. So there's not actually much we need to do there. It keeps it fairly simple. Do this, that gives us our tracked objects. The other thing that I will do is when we unlock, so we've performed a teleporter, I'm going to do a tracked objects clear. Feel like we want to get rid of that at that point. I also think we could potentially only do the locking checking. Could do that up here. I think it'll be fine in this case. So we've got our sender and receiver objects. Now we need to relocate them. So for each var, and this is something where I'm going to actually set up a function for this. Move objects, sender, and we are moving it from sender to receiver. Then we have the flip side, where we get the receiver objects, and they are going from receiver to sender. So this will be void move objects, takes a list of game object to move. And I'll actually, with this, but I think that's actually fine. So sender, receiver, because that works for the sort of context here. So what I'm going to do then is for each var mover in to move. So I need to get its location relative to its sender. So vector 3 offset is mover dot transform dot position minus sender transform position. So then we say mover, its transform position is now actually receiver transform position plus offset. That should mean the things get swapped. So let's test it out. Let's see what happens. All going well, I should be able to teleport now from one location to another. So let's go here. I'm going to teleport to B. Hop in here. And I'm over at B now. I want to go to C. Rings appear. Now we could do some fading out effects, stuff like that, but that is working. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to chuck in a cube, and I'm going to give this a tag of teleportable. So this cube will be teleportable. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that cube and place that in one of these. Now, I will want to check and make sure that it does properly get added in as a actual tracked object. So that's going to be something that I do just a initial test here, where I'll make sure that it does get added in. I will add in that tag, teleportable. So let's test this out and make sure, because what I want to be able to have happen is that they swap places. So run this. Now it has not added that in, and I suspect that if I grab that cube, even moving it in and out, it won't actually activate it. That's not an unusual thing. What I suspect will need to have happen there is that this will typically need a rigid body on it. And if I then run it, then it's going to find it. It will see it, it's added it in. It's not going to initiate the teleport, but it has added it in. So it is at teleporter B. So I'm going to go to teleporter A and say, cool, I want to teleport between this. I need to remove that, because I don't actually want any breakpoints on this. So I'm teleporting, and I have swapped locations with the cube. If I tell it I want to swap back, disappeared. Now in that case, that has happened because the cube has not gone and reset, which is to be expected. It's not going to go and reactivate. We cleared our list of ones, and because it's been just moved in like that, it's generally not going to populate the stuff from the physics side. So what we could do is, when we go and do this unlocking, actually pass in the things that were transported. So these are getting moved to the sender, and these are getting moved here. So then we set up in our unlock function. So unlock list game object transported objects. We can set this then. That should just mean that if we then reactivated the teleporter, it would then carry over. So we're going to confirm that. We want to make sure we can bounce that cube back and forth quite a few times. So it's in B. We're going to use this teleporter to head to B. We're here. Swaps us over. Cube's where it should be. We're going to activate the teleporter again. And we're over at B. We can't see the cube, and we can see the cube has actually gone and is falling. So we saw we're getting some weird behavior there with the cube, and we'll also notice if we teleport from A to C, which we'll happily do, but then we try to go back, we don't actually move. So we've got a few things where there's some issues happening. And so one of the things that we want to actually end up doing is, where we did add in unlock, doing that extra bit of tracking, we don't actually, it turns out we don't actually really need to do that. The on trigger enter exit is actually firing perfectly well. So we can remove that and this. So now if we go and try to do the teleporting between them, what we're expecting is to be able to comfortably move. So we'll go from A to B. So we're now at B. And then we're going to go from B to A. And it's correctly teleported us, which is good. So we can then switch to go to C. So that's working well with being able to move between those. So that resolves that issue. Now with the cube, we'll see we swap there now. So that we've swapped with the cube over at C. Sorry, the cube's over at B. So we're going to teleport to B, make sure the cube swaps with us. So we've moved, the cube is over there. We're going to then go back from B to A. And again, we've moved and the cube has as well. So sorting out that issue with the clearing for the triggers has resolved this also. So I can just very happily now switch from one to the other and be teleporting through. So we've got functional teleporter happening there. It'd be nice to have a little bit of a visual effect. So that's something where a little bit of sort of a visual effect would be good. And what we could do, there's a few different sort of ways we could set that up. But something that we could do is we could create a little bit of an animation that we play, for example. So the player, their camera already has the ability for a storyboard. Now, it doesn't have a image on it. We want to actually just have a very simple plain white sprite. So we'll set that up so it has just a little texture. So create folder, texture, and what we'll do is we will add in one that is just a plain white one. Okay, so I've just got a 1 pixel white texture that we can link this to. And what that does is that alpha there, if we're looking through the game view, that will just fade that. So that's something where we could kick off a little bit of a timeline or an animation that's controlling that. So what I'm going to do is for the time this, I'm going to set up I think timeline would be my preference for this, I think. So I'm going to create a timeline I'll just call teleport effect. And we'll bring that into the scene. And this is not going to play on awake. It doesn't have a wrap mode, anything like of that. We can then edit this. And what I'll do, so I will bring the setup down here. I'll add in an animation track. You can tell it to record. What we're needing to do for this is pretty simple. Just have it at 0, and then this, we are currently viewing this in number of seconds. So I want it to be pretty quick. I just want it to be a real sort of just bright flash and then gone. So we can go to 0.5, set that to 1, and stop that. So then we can just test. That's pretty good. And if I link that up to, we'll make it that our teleporter controller has access to that. So we'll give it the ability to, I can create here using Unity engine .events, have a serialized field, Unity event on teleport. And in terms of when I invoke this, I will do this at, I think, this point. And we could queue off then sound effects also if we wanted stuff like that, if we wanted different things happening with the effect. There's a lot of bits we could be doing with that. I'll link that up to the effect here. So playable director, play. So what should happen is now when I go and do a teleport, I get a bit of a brief sort of fade out happen. So we're going to teleport to C, hop in, get the quick flash, and then done. So we've got a functional set of teleporters with the different effects happening there, and being able to dial in and select our destination, having it swap between the different locations as well. So we've got that fully up and running, and something we could then, just if we want more destinations, it's just a matter of placing more of that prefab and setting the names, and then it will work. Thanks folks, I hope you found the video helpful and interesting. If you're looking for the code for the project, that is available up on GitHub. The link for that's in the description below. You can use this on any of your own projects, commercial, non-commercial ones. If there's other sort of ones like of this, sort of things you've seen in another game or in a movie or a TV series, feel free to chuck in a comment below. Always keen to hear other ideas of things that people might be interested in seeing me do videos of. If you did find it helpful, chuck in a like and subscribe. Really helps out, really appreciated. And if you're looking for other ways to support the channel, then I do have a Patreon, and there's a link for that in the description below as well. But until next time, bye.